Hey everybody, let's talk about the difference between choice and expression in an RPG. This is an easy concept to get wrong, and if you get it wrong, you end up creating flat, fractured content that doesn't go anywhere. And this happens all the time. Even with big games, Baldur's Gate 3, Mass Effect, and Mass Effect Andromeda, all those, they all have moments where they get this backwards, they get it wrong, and that ends up being the flat, uninteresting part of the game. So let's talk about it. When you're creating an RPG scenario, you might be thinking in terms of meaningful choices. Oh, does the player side with the villagers, or does the player side with the mages? Does the player save the council or doom them? This branching path setup is so common that we've come to associate it with RPGs, but it has nothing to do with RPGs. It's a completely separate concept that happens to be entangled now because of market pressures. Moreover, it's confusing us as to what a choice is. And this is a thing that you have to understand. The player can never make a choice in an RPG. Sounds strange? Think about it. The player can only make a choice inside their own brain meats. Then they tell the RPG about that choice. The player doesn't choose something by clicking on an option from the menu. Clicking on an option from the menu is the way the player tells the game what they chose. This is not pedantic. This is a major change in how you think about things because the player is a choice-making machine. The player will make a million choices. The player will have an opinion on every piece of content that shows up on screen. And every technique, every mechanic that ever gets used, they'll all have choices. It's like, I have opinions, and the game's job is to listen. The game's job is to let the player express the choices that the player already made. The choices that are locked away up in their brain meat, stuck as headcanon. Once you are allowed to express those choices into the game world, now it's canon. Now you have an RPG. Now you have an experience that's memorable and fun and matters. Internalizing this is really important. So let's just give you an example. The player is making a character, and they make Thief Hat McVampire Face, right? Who's got a cape and a dagger, and is ready to wander the world as an evil, thiefy person. Well, the player doesn't stop there. It's not like the player says, oh, I made the choice to play as a thief, and therefore now I'm going to go watch reruns. No, they're like, I made the choice to play as a thief. I can't wait for the game to let me be one. I can't wait for the game to let me express my choice. You see? The game has a lot of ways of doing that. The game's like, okay, well, here's a combat situation where your thief skills might be useful. Or here's some skill tests where you can try out your stealth and your lockpicking. Or here's a thieves guild. They'll only talk to thieves. These options are ways to tell the player, hey, you chose a thief. Cool, right? Look at all this stuff. Because you chose a thief, here is stuff that's happening. Your choice is now being expressed in the game world. Now, some of these are also going to be choices. Do you want to talk to the Thieves Guild or not? But the fact that they're choices is irrelevant. They exist to allow the player to express a choice the player made, not to be meaningful in and of themselves. Once you understand this, you can start to understand the kinds of things that the player is going to be making choices about in their head, and you can create the scenario to let them express those choices specifically. I'll give you an example. In the starting fantasy worlds, there are always goblins. And there's a goblin, and here's a goblin. And they're picking on some villagers, and the villagers have hidden themselves away behind a wall because they don't really like the idea of getting eaten by goblins. So the villagers are stuck up there, the goblins are stuck down here. Never the twain shall meet. Everybody's unhappy. Classic approach, right? This is like the standard fantasy opener. You need to add some content here. You need to add things to do. How are things going to happen? What's going on? Well, how do you do that? you think about what you want the players to be able to express. What sort of choices do you think the players have made recently? Well, if this is the first scenario in the game, then they've just made their characters. So you need to allow them to express their character choices. So let's talk about the tactical and combat choices. The goblins that put traps up in the woods. Oh, if you're a thief, you can undo them. If you're a ranger, you can go around. If you're a cleric, you can push through and then heal everybody. Or maybe you can hire someone from town if you're a mage, whatever. Oh, are you a big buff fighter? Maybe you can call out that troll that's leading them and do one-on-one, mano-a-mano fighting without having to take on a million goblins. Maybe you can set up a magical trap and lure the goblins out and exterminate a huge force. These sorts of tactical considerations allow the player to express their tactical build, the options that they chose at the beginning of the game. Same with the town. Did you choose a character that is a linguist? Well, then they can talk to the immigrant group and sort of get them on their side. Did you choose a gambler? Well, then you can overcome the seedy underbelly and steal back all of the people's goods from the thieves. Are you a cleric? Well, there's a temple in town, and you can go there and be cleric-y. These are things that allow the player to see their choices in the game world, to turn their head canon into canon. And what matters will change over the course of the game. Controlling that is a big part of how you write the RPG. You want to make sure that you understand what the player is thinking about by offering them mechanics and content at the right rate and at the right time. So after you save the village from the goblins, oh, there's a dragon attack, dragon. And your job now is to try and rescue the villagers because the entire village is burning down. So what sort of expressions are you going to allow in this particular situation? What is the player making choices about? Well, some of their choices are going to be related to statistical stuff. They've just leveled up. So now we can talk about, oh, when they leveled up, did they put all of their points into stealth or did they break it up into different sorts of groups? We can kind of change the challenge levels and give them a reward for focusing or not focusing, just to show that we're listening. Or did they choose the magic sword or the magic shield when they defeated the goblins? Now that can matter a little bit. But it's also not strictly limited to stats. They've just been working with villagers all week, right? So maybe they now have some opinions on which villagers are worth saving and which villagers they don't like. Or, it doesn't have to be quite that harsh, but they've definitely grown fonder of some villagers than others. You can simply allow them to make that choice known. They can express which villagers they like by how they interact with the town's evacuation. It's not necessarily like a specific choice. Oh, do you side with the old wizard or do you side with the young lady? It's not necessarily a choice like that. It could be just who are you evacuating first? Who are you evacuating second and third? Which routes are you securing? These sorts of things are also a way to allow the player to show who they care about. They can make these choices about who they care about because you introduced these people and you made them someone the player could care about. The choice is happening inside their head. You don't know when. They could have made it half a second after they met these people, or they could have made it half a second before that shows up as an option in the final encounter. But either way, they are deciding in their own head which of these characters matters, and you're giving them the grist to come to that decision. And then you ask them. You say, well, which character do you care about? Tell me. Are you listening? Are you paying attention? Which of this stuff is connecting? Let me know. I think that we'll have a better adventure if we have a dialogue here, right? So what do you care about? Let me know. We'll build on it. That's the basic idea, right? The player is making choices in their head, and you have to allow them to tell you what choices they've made, because that's how you collaborate. That's how you create an adventure that matters to the player. And that's not necessarily a branching path. It's also not really a choice. The player is making choices willy-nilly all the time. It's just a way of expressing the choices that the player already makes. This is also something you have to watch out for going the opposite direction. Let's say that you've decided that your village is actually a combination of random villagers who have nothing and can't defend themselves, and some wizards that for some reason hate them, want them all dead, and are evil. And you've decided to make it so that the player has to choose which of these sides to side with. It's an either-or choice. Which one were you going to choose? I don't know. But assuming the player didn't already make their choice, having this option pop up will remove them from the game, because they have to make the choice now. And that means they have to stop. They have to take this choice out of the game and put it into their brain meats and think about all of the ramifications and what they care about and what's going on and all that jazz. And in that time, they're not in the game anymore. They're not thinking about what's going on in the world of the game or any of that. They're thinking, oh, who do I like better? Well, which things would the devs, have focused on? Oh, well, if I choose this, am I going to have to do that? Am I balance the meta game here? Should I do it like this so I can massage that? It's like, that's probably not the kind of choice you want them to make. So when you offer the player a meaningful choice, you may actually be removing them from the game. Now, that's not to say meaningful choices are bad. They have their place, especially if you want to put some pressure on the player, but they are not a way to allow the player to express a personal choice. They're a way to force the player to engage with content that they don't really care about otherwise. And that's really probably not the best way to do it, right? Like, let's back off on those a little bit. Let's leave those for the late game when the player has a lot on their plate and has to decide between two really, really valuable things that, are you going to save all of the people in this village, or are you going to save your husband? That's a choice worth thinking about. That's a choice where the player might gnaw on their fingers a little bit, but that's a late game option. That's something you can't ask until the player has already chosen both of those options as important and good. So that's basically the long and short of it. I just wanted to explain that the player can't make a choice in the RPGs. There's no way to do that. The only thing a player can do is report what choice they've made outside of the game. And once you understand that, you can start to help the player have some fun choices to make, and then listen for the player's choices as closely as you can. Let them express those choices in the game world. That's how you create meaningful content. That's how you create compelling content. Now, there are other tricks too, but that's one that doesn't get talked about very much, so I figured we should talk about it. That's it. Let me know what you think.